And Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make a beef, kale, and vegetable stewy soup. Kind of hybrid between both. A grilled cheese to dunk in it because you gotta have grilled cheese with soup, and some hummingbird muffins, which will be delicious. They're kind of inspired off of hummingbird cake, and that's kind of a southern dish here. But it's a great way to use bananas if you have them. So I have some pretty ripe bananas here. So we're going to start with this and we're going to mash up our bananas. And you need about 3 very, very ripe bananas. The riper, the better. They'll have a nice sweetness to them. They'll bring out their flavors. So I've got these. Whenever mine get really thin, I just pop them in the fridge so they don't go bad, but they'll be nice and sweet. Okay, so we've got our 3 bananas here. And I'm just going to use my spatula real quick, and we're just going to kind of smash them up. Although these are super ripe, so there's not much smashing to do. But again, you don't want to use firm bananas. Your cake won't, or your muffin won't turn out sweet, and it'll just have a lumpy texture to it. So I'm just smashing my banana here. We'll add our sugar and our butter in here in just a second, but I always like to give it a little pre-smash. Okay, so we've got our 3 bananas in here. We're going to add in a cup of melted butter. So that's 2 sticks. Now this is, again, a very rich but delectable cake or muffin, because I'm making it in muffins. You could say it's a cupcake, but muffins make it sound healthier. And we're going to mix in our butter into our bananas here. And we will then add our sugar in. I always just like to give it a good start for it. Okay, we need our granulated sugar. We're going to use 1 3/4 cup of granulated sugar. So let me get my first. So 1, and then I need 3/4. Pinch more. There we go. And we're going to do a mini creaming of this together. I want to make sure I get that sugar all mixed in before I add in my next ingredients. And so we're going to, again, mix this up. And this is going to make more than 12 muffins. So I'll bake them up in batches, but I'll have this ready. So again, we're going to give this a good kind of, as I do it, I'm kind of pushing my spatula into the side of the bowl to really kind of cream them together. But since, it is melted butter, you don't have to actually do a lot of creaming. But just to really make sure that butter and those bananas and the sugar all come together well. Okay, beautiful. Now we have, this is a cup of pureed pineapple. You can also use an 8-ounce can of crushed pineapple with the juice and everything. I had extra, I never have canned pineapple, but I have fresh pineapple all the time. So I just pureed it up in my blender to give the pineapple part of our cake. And this is a really key ingredient because it adds a lovely acidity to it and an extra sweetness to it, and just great flavor. And, hummingbirds like fruit and flower and nectar. So, you got to throw the pineapple in there. Okay, we've got our pineapple in here. And again, I just blended it up in my blender to make it nice and, fine. And we're going to add in 3 eggs. 2 and 3. And I'm going to poke each one of these yolks. And we're going to mix all these ingredients. And the great thing is because we haven't added in our flour yet, we can really work and mix these ingredients together and mix it well. Once we add that flour, we do want to be more delicate when we mix it because we are using a butter base. You could definitely, I love butter in my baked goods, but you could also use oil in the same ratio. So I used a cup of butter, but you could also use a cup of oil. Here we go. So we've got that nice and mixed in here. And now we are going to add in our vanilla, cinnamon, and baking soda and salt. So we're going to add in a teaspoon of baking soda. So 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. And when I take my cinnamon, I always do a heaping teaspoon. So it's a little bit more than a teaspoon, but that's just because I love extra cinnamon. And this is going to be the base for our hummingbird cake. And then we're going to add in a teaspoon of vanilla extract. There we go. And then last, a half teaspoon of salt. And then we'll be ready to add our flour in, and then we'll fold in our shredded coconut and our chopped up pecans. Let's add in our half a teaspoon of salt. Now, the butter I use salted butter. So if you were going to use oil or unsalted butter, you'd want to add closer to a teaspoon of salt to get the right kind of flavor enhancer that the salt adds. Let's make sure our baking soda gets mixed in here as well as our spices.
You have a question? Could you replace it with vanilla paste?
You could definitely place it with vanilla paste. What I would do is I'd probably take a little bit of the batter out and mix that vanilla paste into it first and then add it back in there to make sure it gets really mixed around in there. But yes, you could definitely use a vanilla paste. The liquid amount isn't going to affect the base of our muffins here. Okay. Slide these to the side. I'm going to grab my flour and I've got my pecans that we'll add here in just a second. So we're going to add in 2 cups of pecans, or not pecans, 2 cups of flour. My brain was still on the pecans. And we're using just some all-purpose flour. So 1 and make sure there's 2. And then we're going to mix these in until they're just combined. We want to make sure that we don't over mix them because over mixing is going to cause them to get to be more dense and stiff. So I'm going to mix it until it's just barely combined, also knowing that I'm going to be folding in my coconut and my pecans here in just a second. So I want to make sure, again, I don't over mix it because I do want a nice light and fluffy a muffin. Now these are chocked full of a lot of fruit, and hence, we've got that pineapple in here and the banana as well. So they are more of a hearty muffin. Here we go. This is like, I always say it's kind of like a southern, like a kind of a twist on carrot cake in the sense, because you've got the pecans and it's traditionally served with a cream cheese frosting, and we're going to make a kind of a cream cheese frosting to go on top of it. So it's kind of in the same family. Okay, so we've got that mixed in. We have this nice kind of lumpy batter here. And now we're going to add in a half cup of coconut. Let me grab some scissors to open this up.
I got a question. Are you going to be posting the recipe?
We will upload the link to our videos on our page here, and I think I might make this as a recipe card for this week for all of my members who subscribe, or to our members. So I try to post like 3 recipe cards a week for them in there, but I do have the videos available for everyone. So we're going to add in a half cup of coconut. You can do sweetened or unsweetened. I like to use sweetened because I like it to, the little bit of the sweetness in it. But you could definitely keep it unsweetened. So we're going to fold this in, and we're also going to add in about a half cup of chopped pecans. Now, you could add in up to a cup if you like it really, really nutty, but I prefer a little less of a nut on it, and then we'll sprinkle my remaining bit on top of them after we're done. So we've got here, and we're just going to fold them in. And if you're ever wondered what folding in is in, you are essentially scooping up from the bottom like this and folding it over the top. This is just a way to mix in your final ingredients without over mixing your batter. So just again, slide all the way from the bottom and fold it over the top. And it only takes a couple for it to get mixed up, just like that. And now we are ready to scoop these guys out into our things and bake up. Let me slide that off. So I like to bake these. Now you could totally bake this up in like cake pans if you wanted to, and it would bake up just fine. I love the muffins because the muffins just cook a little bit faster, and you know, they stay a little bit more moist. Okay, let me grab a spoon, a metal spoon. It's easier to scoop out with a metal spoon. And we're gonna fill these guys all the way up to the tippy top so they get a good dome on them. And again, this is gonna make more than a dozen, so I will reserve some of this batter for later to bake up. But I'm just gonna pop in my first kind of batch. It makes about 18 good sized muffins. But this is one of those ones that this is the smallest that I can shrink it down. I normally, like when I'm making a big hummingbird cake, you know, I will double it to give, you know, the 5 layers that I like on my cakes. But for muffins, we've got it down. So we're going to go in. And now I'm going to come back over and I'm going to fill these up because, again, I want to fill these up to the top so that we get a good, nice kind of dome on them because the dome is the best part of a muffin.
Can you go over what's in the batter?
Yes. So we started out with 3 very, very ripe bananas, almost, you know, overripe bananas. We kind of mashed those up. Then we added in a cup of melted butter, 1 3/4 cup of sugar. We kind of creamed those together. Then we added in 3 eggs and mixed those all together. And then it was a teaspoon of baking soda, a teaspoon of cinnamon, a teaspoon of, or half a teaspoon of salt, and a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then a cup of pureed pineapple. You can also use a can of crushed pineapple. And 2 cups of flour. And I think, and then a half a cup of coconut and a half a cup of crushed pecans. Okay, just about have these all evenly filled out here. Beautiful. Now, these guys can go pop in the oven. I have my oven preheated to 350 degrees. And these are going to cook for about 20 minutes. It might take a little bit more because I pureed my own pineapple, and depending on how much juice was in it and how liquidy it is, I might take a bit longer. But I'm going to start with 20 minutes because I'd rather err on being underdone than overdone because I can always add more time. Okay, so 20 minutes at 350, but again, it could also take up to, you know, could take it up to additional 5 more, just depending on how liquid some of our ingredients are. I'm going to give my hands a quick wash here. And then let's start working on our lunch. And then we will also be making a cream cheese frosting for that in a little bit. Well, a hybrid cream cheese. But let's get our lunch prepped and ready here. I'm going to get my onions sauteed. I forgot my knife over here. So we're going to make kind of just a hearty little beef stew here. I had like 1.5, I had 2 whole chuck roasts that I'm going to use. And I took part of it because I think I'm going to do a pot roast for dinner tonight. And so I'm just going to use part of it to make beef stew. And then I'm going to do pot roast with mashed potatoes, just like your comfort food. It's one of those things that I can prep and like leave it cooking while I'm at soccer practice with my daughter. So that will have, you know, nice and delicious food ready for us. Okay, I'm going to just take 1/2 of a yellow onion because I'm making a small batch of our beef, you know, stew here. So I don't want too much of it. So just a half. And we're just going to do a simple dice on it. And then I'm going to let it start to saute up here in our pan. I'm put about, I'm going to say 2 teaspoons of olive oil. And I'm going to turn it up I'm going to start it on about a 6 to saute the onions up. Here we go. And then I'm just going to slide, and we're going to start chopping up our chuck roast to go into our stew. There we go. Now, anytime you see, because this is not a pot roast, which means you're not going to have, the high heat to kind of really reduce and, down the fat, just cut out the big chunks of fat. Otherwise, you're just going to have this really chewy bits of meat in your stew. And it's just not nice. You can definitely use, the stew meat you get from the store. That's typically just random cuts of meat that have been, like chopped up. So it's when they're trimming meat, those are the extra bits. That works great for this. I love a good chuck roast in a stew because it's got a nice marble fat roll through it to it. So it makes it a lot more tender than some other cuts. But we're just going to chop it up. Because I don't want it to take forever to cook and to get soft, I'm cutting them into nice smaller bits. That way it will cook up a lot faster, get tender a lot faster. There we go. So we'll let our onions, saute in that oil, and then we'll throw our meat in there, and then we'll get our other vegetables. But I do like my onions to get a little bit of heat by themselves. Now, if you do a lot of meat prep at home, and you're always having to cut through, I would say I'd highly invest in a cleaver, which is this kind of hefty knife here, because it is much easier to cut through your heartier pieces of meat. You don't need to use quite as much force in it because you have more heft behind your blade. Okay, let's see. These are some fatty pieces. Here we go. And take off this little bit of fat. And again, for soups, you definitely want to take the fat off. If for a nice oven roast, keep it on because that high heat that you cook it on will help that fat reduce down. But in a soup, because you're going to be in a broth, you're just going to have a rubbery grizzle base to it. So no need to keep it. There we go. And again, nice smaller bite-sized pieces. I find even if you buy the pre-cut up stew meat at the store, you typically have to cut it a lot smaller because it is very, very big in their slices. I'll wash my hands real quick. And we'll set this to the side.
You have a question about how long is the cook time for the soup?
This soup, you can have it done in 30 minutes. You can also have it stew even longer and get more tender and stuff like that. But it will be tender enough to eat in 30 minutes, which is what I love to do for a nice lunchtime soup, is one that can be cooked up really fast. But the longer it stews, of course, the softer, more tender the meat and the more the flavor sits. I actually find that soups typically taste better the next day because all of the flavors have had time to marry together. But again, who wants to wait? But this is definitely a great one to make in a big batch if you want to do meal prep during the week to just get those great flavors in it.
And do you coat the meat in flour?
I do not coat the meat in flour. What I will do is at the end, after I'm done sauteing it, I will add in a little bit of flour on top of it. I find coating the meat in the flour sometimes puts too much flour in it, and I'd rather sprinkle a tablespoon over at the very end of sauteing it with the onions to get it there, because I don't want this to be a super thick one, a stew. Now, if I'm making, I have a couple ones where I do coat it where I'm making a really rich one, but for this one, I want it to be a little bit more brothy. Let's see. We can probably, let me stir this one more time, and then we're going to add in our meat. And I like the meat to kind of get a cook up on its own, but without the flour, and then kind of sprinkle it in there. So let's add all of our kind of chopped up meat here. And And I would say this is probably about a pound of chuck roast. And then we're just going to give it kind of a quick toss in there. And then we'll let it kind of sear up. There we go. I'm going to let the heat. And while that's heating up, I'm going to prep my other vegetables that are going to go in here. Oh, I already have it out. Okay, I've got 3 carrots. So we're going to peel off our, like this woodsy outer skin of it. That way it will be nice and tender. It's always dry. You always want to peel this off. It doesn't have a great texture, and it definitely has an earthier flavor. So right underneath it is where you're going to get that nice tender carrot. And then I'm going to do a slightly, I'm not going to leave my carrots full. I'm going to chop them in half because, again, I don't want to have a super huge piece of carrot. That's going to take longer to cook. And I want to be able to get all of my little vegetables and everything in a great, bite. So let's take off these bottom ones. And here. So the smaller bits right here, I can chop up and I'll leave these just fine. Once we start to get a little bit thicker, I will have it. And simply because, again, if you leave them too big, they'll take forever, and you don't want every one bite to just be a carrot. You want to try to get all of those flavors in every bite. That way you get the whole, flavor profile together.
Question. Do you ever save your veggie scraps to make a vegetable broth?
I have done it before, and I always sit there and I'm like, oh, I need to get better about reusing things. I've been wanting to start actually composting. I used to compost, and then, you have 5 kids and things get harder and harder to manage and stuff like that. And so I've been wanting to start up the composting, and I've thought about keeping my scraps to make, because I know you just throw them in a bag in the freezer until you've got a big collection, and then you can make this wonderful vegetable stock with it. And, maybe as we get more into like soup season and I've got a lot more of the, that flavorful veggie scraps, I might do that to really create a really good vegetable broth or reduction for it. Okay, let's give this a nice stir here. And then let me grab my little spoon rest. I'm going to add in some spices with the meat to let it cook up, because I really like those flavors to really infuse in the meat. So I've got some rosemary. You could also use fresh rosemary. I'm going to use about a half a teaspoon or so. I feel like rosemary has a pretty strong flavor that will really come out, so you don't need to use a whole lot. And then we're going to use about a half a teaspoon of black pepper. I really love the black pepper with the chuck roast. I feel like it really enhances the flavor. And then I'm going to take 2 bay leaves, and we're going to crush these up into small bits so that the flavors will really infuse into the meat faster than leaving it whole. So again, I'm just going to crush it up. When you crush up bay leaves, it's going to have the same texture as rosemary. Rosemary is a firmer spice, but since it's so little, you don't really notice it. Most of the time, you fish out your bay leaf at the end because it doesn't break down. But when you crush it up, you'll get those flavors out, but you won't have to deal with the one big leaf in your thing. So let's give this a good stir here. Okay. And again, we won't add our flour into our beef stew until all of our vegetables are sauteed up. And that's when I'll add my flour in. But we're going to add our carrots in because our meat has a good kind of sear on both sides now. So we've got our 3 big carrots. We'll toss those in. I'm going to give them a nice stir and kind of coat them up. And we'll let those cook while we prep our celery and we've got some red potatoes, and we'll have kale. And then we're also going to put some tomato paste in here. Tomato paste will also act as a thickener for our stew as well, but give a lovely bit of acidity, and I have tomatoes as well. Just like with my carrots, I don't want to have huge kind of chunks of celery in here. So I'm going to, have them, and then we will slice them up So we'll have our lovely little bits of celery in here. This is going to add a more aromatic flavor to the broth. I do love celery. If you're not a big fan of celery, just leave them in bigger, sticks so you get the great flavor in the broth, but then you can remove them at the end so you're not eating the celery in the soup. But they do add just wonderful flavor to the overall stew soup. Okay. Throw these guys in here. And I'm going to give them a good stir and kind of coat them up with all of that nice kind of beefy juices and those spices. And then we'll get our potatoes going. Again, I'm using just little red potatoes. You could also use Yukon Gold potatoes. If you were going to, I would stick with either red or Yukon potatoes. I wouldn't do a russet because russets disintegrate and they don't keep their shape while you're cooking. So they'll, turn to mush in your soup. These will keep their nice texture and shape and will be lovely. They also have a very delicate skin, which means you don't have to peel them, which is always a plus because that's less prep work. So I've got a handful of these and I'm just slicing them up again into smaller pieces because I'm trying to get everything to be around the same size as our chunks of meat. Nothing too big because you don't want to, again, have just like one vegetable in your mouth as you're eating it. And let's get these. Okay, I think we'll save these two because again, I like to make a small batch of soup at lunchtime instead of like a big thing because this is, my idea is to serve 4 people with our soup. My husband and I and our parents, and well, I should say 5 because my 13-year-old son always comes home right when we're about done cooking and he's like, "Oh, I'm ready for second lunch." Okay. So I'm going to give this a good stir, kind of coat this up. And now, before we put in our tomatoes, we'll add our kale in once we have the broth up, but we're going to add some diced tomatoes to this. I'm going to add in our tomato paste in there, and this is going to help give it a rich kind of body to our thing. So let me grab a spoon. And I think I'm going to finally use up the rest of this. Normally I buy my tomato paste in like a nice tube where you can just squeeze out, but I had this because I needed more than what a tube was the other day. So about a tablespoon of our tomato paste in here. And we're going to just coat all of our veggies and our meat up in this tomato paste. And that's going to add just this really great flavor to our broth as well. And it's going to help as a thickener. So again, I've got this. And we'll add a little bit of flour in, but again, I don't do that until after I have my tomatoes. Well, actually, no, I'm going to do it before my tomatoes because they will let out too much liquid. So let me grab my flour. And this way I find you end up using less flour and it kind of coats it more and it gives, instead of it thickening up as you keep adding in your vegetables and potentially burning to the bottom of your pan, this will allow it to thicken up lovely right now. And you'll get your everything coated evenly.
You have a question? What quart size is that pan?
This is, oh my goodness. This is this, let me look at the number on the bottom of here. This is a 22, which makes me think that this is a 3.5 quart Le Creuset. I have to say I have like 13 Le Creusets. I have all the way up to the 13.25 quart one and all between. So I'm like, got to remember exactly which one. This one I find is perfect. The 30 or the 22 is perfect for like a meal for 4 people. It is like kind of the perfect size. Okay, so I'm mixing in about a tablespoon of my flour here. And this is going to also bind with that tomato paste. And we're kind of coat it up. So it will kind of stick here and it's making this kind of a thick paste coating our meat and our veggies.
Can you use cornstarch instead?
Yes. Now, if you use cornstarch, I prefer to use it at the very end of when I'm cooking. And what I do is I take out the broth take out a cup of the broth, and then I'll mix a tablespoon of cornstarch into that broth. And then throw it after it's mixed up. You kind of make a slurry and then you put it back in to thicken it up, because cornstarch has, I find that's better to add at the end for a better product, like end product. And you don't want to just dump it into your soup or your stew, because it will like make little cornstarch dumplings. So you want to take out that liquid and make a slurry with it and then put it back in. So you can definitely use it, especially to make a gluten-free version of it. You just have to alter the way you add it in. Okay. And I definitely do my cornstarch with a couple of my beef stew recipes where I want it to have it gives you a thicker thing, but a slightly different texture thickness to it, which it works well on certain stews. Okay, I've got 2, vine ripe tomatoes here that we are going to add into our stew. And this is going to add in a little bit of, acidity and liquid. And then we'll also add in our broth. But I like to add these in now and then our broth. And then we'll add our kale in at the very, very end. But that can come in with our liquid. It doesn't need to saute up. So let's coat these up. And then we're going to slowly add in our beef broth, which I'm actually going to be using water and beef bouillon for this. Here we go. But you can see it's going to be a very hearty soup or stew. It's like a hybrid there. So I'm not going to necessarily use all 4 cups of this, but I always like to have it. We're going to pour in about 1 cup to start with. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to scrape the bottom of my Dutch oven here. I'm going to turn it down to about a 4 now, 4.5. And to just do that with my spoon, because it's going to allow me to pick up any of those little bits that have kind of crusted on, which is going to add a lot of great flavor to our stew. Here we go. And we'll add in a little bit more. So I've got another cup in. I'm going to mix it in. I don't just flood all of my liquid in there at one time, because I find that it's going to make your soup kind of not get the right consistency. You're just going to slowly pour, and you know what? I might actually use all 4 cups. I always check at my texture of how it looks, and that's when I stop. There we go. And then we'll add again a little bit more. I think I'm going to keep it right there. So I added, I added about 3.5 cups of water in here. So not quite 4 cups, but the tomatoes probably added, more liquid in there. And we'll let this kind of simmer now on here. And then don't forget to add in a big scoop of my beef bouillon. And I like to use this over the store-bought vegetable broth or beef broth or chicken broth, because I can use more of this to get with less liquid, which gives you more flavor. And this is going to be the saltiness part of my soup. I rarely have to add in any extra salt. We're going to put in about a tablespoon of this. And then we're going to go check on our Hummingbird muffins, see if they're ready or if they need a bit more time. But let me get this all mixed up in here. There we go. And we'll let that simmer. And let's go check on our muffins. And then we will start making our grilled cheeses, whip up our frosting, and then we'll be at, the final bit of this. Okay. So they definitely need a little, they're almost done. I will say they need about 2 more minutes. They're looking great. Okay. So I'm going to set my timer for it. I want them to be nice and firm at the top of it for it. Now, again, you can use this. I did it in muffins, but you can also make it in a cake pan or whatnot for it. It is a denser type base to it because you have those bananas and that pineapple and the coconut and the pecans in it. So it is like a richer one. So I feel like they make perfect for the muffins. Okay. Let's get this. I'm going to taste it now that we have, make sure there's no other spices I want to add to it before it continues to simmer. Perfect. Once it comes to a boil, we'll add in our kale. But while we're waiting for that, let's get our grilled cheeses prepped because those always take a hot minute. Add my butter and my cutting board. So 2 days ago, we cooked up our sourdough loaf. Yesterday we were a busy day. And I'm going to use it to make my grilled cheeses. So this is our beautiful loaf. It's, this is about 2 days old, but it's very, very soft and delicious. We had a beautiful peak on it in our design. I find that leftover sourdough makes the best grilled cheeses. Because it's just such a perfect hearty bread. And when you make soups and stews, a nice, lovely grilled cheese to dip into your soup or stew is just heaven on earth to me. I could live off of soups and stews every single day.
You have a question about the soup? Can you use spinach instead of kale?
You can definitely use spinach instead of kale. The only difference is kale is a heartier vegetable. It's more heat tolerant. Spinach is going to wilt up and kind of disappear in there, but you can definitely add it. What I would do with your spinach is add it right before you're about to serve it, like the last, minute or two, because it will completely wilt away. And the longer it cooks, the more it will disappear. Kale keeps its body a little bit longer. Which is great, in soups. It's kind of like how, cabbage is in a soup. It doesn't get soggy or wilty. Okay. Get my pretty sides here. And we're going to use a little bit of butter on each side of on one side of each slice of sourdough. Try to put the slide with the least ridges down on your skillet. Otherwise, it won't get a good toast up. You don't need a lot of butter. Just make sure it's room temperature so it spreads. That way you'll have that nice kind of delicious crunchiness to it. Here we go. And I think, look at that. We're going to be perfect amount here. Let's do this side. And this is, again, to get that nice kind of little crust on it. And then we're going to add our cheese. And I'm just going to do, again, because we have a nice meaty stew here, I'm just going to do a grilled cheese with some sharp cheddar cheese if it wants to open for me. I know I had to go to Costco because I'm like, ooh, we're getting back into soup season. I need to restock my sliced cheeses on everything because can't make grilled cheeses without having lots of cheese. Okay, so we're going to make our layer here. Just make sure you don't have any bits of your cheese kind of hanging over the edge of your bread, or it will just melt down on your onto your griddle, and then it won't cook up as nice. Here we go. Let's get this last one on here. And then these will start cooking. We'll whip up our frosting, and then we'll get our muffins out of the oven, and we'll be down to kind of the final bit of this.
I have a question. What's your favorite cheeses for grilled cheese?
My favorite, well, for a classic, I love cheddar if I'm doing, or a triple cheddar, but my favorite is a mixture of Gouda and Havarti. I just love Gouda and I love Havarti. I like those kind of white creamy cheeses. So those are really delicious. And if I have Edam, I love Edam too, but Edam is very similar to Gouda for it. But splash myself. Good thing I wear an apron. But I do not like American cheese. And I think part of it is I didn't grow up eating American cheese. And so I do not like it, which is, I feel like that's the most common cheese used in grilled cheeses. But for me, that's like the worst. Okay, I'm going to turn this down nice and low, and we'll get our kale in here. Let me turn this guy on. I'm going to turn it on, and we're going to start cooking these up. Now, when I make my grilled cheeses, I do double flips on each side. That's going to allow it to first heat up the bread, start the melting process, and then the final flips is for getting that beautiful golden crispy crust. Okay, so I've got some big kale leaves here, and I'm just going to, kind of vein them or de-tree them, leaf them. And it's just simply kind of pulling on these like leaf parts off. There we go. And then I'm going to give it a good chop. You can always use kind of pre-chopped kale if you want to. But I find when you buy it, just the leaves, it lasts a lot longer. In there, I feel once you start getting it cut up, it starts to go bad. And then let's see. Well, let's go check on our muffins. I thought I set my timer here, but it didn't go off, so those should be fine. Beautiful. Actually, they turned out perfect. Good reminding if anyone prompted. I swore you guys saw me set it, guys. Beautiful. Nice. Perfect. I always like to make sure it has that nice firmness to the top. And then once this cools out, we'll pop them out and then we'll put our frosting on it, but we'll make our cream cheese frosting on it. But this is our Hummingbird cake kind of muffin. So it's the base in here. We've got bananas, a pureed pineapple, coconut, pecans with, flour, butter, egg, sugar, cinnamon. It's going to be absolutely delicious. Okay, we've got that. Let's get our kale chopped up here. So I've taken it off the leaves, and this is about, 1.5 to 2 cups of kale. It'll probably be closer to 1 cup of kale once you've gotten it chopped up on here. And kale, again, you could use spinach, but I find kale just keeps its form a little bit better, while spinach has a milder flavor to it.
You have a question? Did you go through all the apples yet?
I still have 7 apples left, so we're close. And you know what? In like 2 weeks, not this weekend, but the next weekend, we'll actually be back at the apple orchard for Pumpkin Fest, and they'll have another you pick. So I'll probably come home with more. Although I'll see what else they have. Let's add in our kale. They're supposed to have more varieties available to pick, so we'll get some. We had these pears too, and my kids have been loving the pears that we got from the apple orchard. They're, it's just nothing's better than when you make something with an apple you picked yourself off the tree. It's just tastes so much better. So much more fresh. Okay, we've got these kind of simmering now, but you can see we've just got this lovely thicker broth on here, which is gorgeous. And we're going to let it simmer. And now let's finish up our frosting here. And let's get this show on the road. So I'm just going to do kind of a lighter cream cheese frosting on here, not a super rich one. I'm going to do half butter, half cream cheese. So I'm going to do, half a cup of butter, and then I'm going to eyeball a half a cup of cream cheese. It's going to be delicious. My husband hates cream cheese frosting, but that's what you have to put with Hummingbird cake. It's just like with carrot cake. You have to have it. And you know what? I made cream cheese frosting the other day, and I didn't tell him it was cream cheese frosting, and he said it was delicious. It's the mental thing. Okay, we're going to add in a good scoop of our cream cheese here. I'm just trying to visually make it look the same as the other one. Now, I make my cream cheese frosting not as cream cheesy as the typical. Most cream cheese frosting, it's like a 2-to-1 ratio. I've got a little thing, a 2-to-1 ratio where you have, 16 ounces of cream cheese to 8 ounces of butter. But I like it half and half. So, and I think it gives it more of a buttercream, a lighter texture to it. We're going to cream these up real quick. Make sure you use room temperature butter. The cream cheese is pretty soft, so it doesn't quite have to be room temperature for it, but we're going to get a good mix right here. Let's just start it. And then let me see how these guys are going before I flip them, see if they're ready for their initial. I'm going to let them sit a little bit longer. I'm going to turn it up. Now we're going to add in some vanilla and then our powdered sugar, and we're going to add our powdered sugar in batches. I'm going to add in a teaspoon of vanilla, which I have found this is about 2 cupfuls of it. And then my powdered sugar. Let me first give this. I'm going to turn this stew all the way down to the lowest of the low. Let's give it a good stir. As you can see, it is just looking gorgeous. This is our beef and vegetable stew. It's chock full of potatoes, carrots, celery, tomatoes, tomato paste, chuck roast, onions, and all that deliciousness. Okay, we've got our powdered sugar here. Let's give this a quick whip up. I'm going to start with 1 cup, but we are going to be using more. But what I found is you don't put all of your powdered sugar in at one time, or you're going to have a sugar cloud in your kitchen. So start until you've got a nice kind of incorporating into it. Here we go. Now we're going to add in 1 more. And I'm going to whip this even faster. But that initial adding in, just beautiful. You see how quick it whips up when it's nice and not super hot or cold? Okay. I'm going to get a quick taste. Perfect. And it's the right sweetness. I don't make mine overly sweet because, again, I don't want it to be super overpowering. This isn't a cake. It's more of a muffin. I'm going to give this a really good whip real fast. There we go. Beautiful. And now we've got this kind of fluffier one. Now, the more fluffy you want it, the longer you whip it, and you could always add in some cream to make it even fluffier. Let's flip these guys over, and then I'm going to put my cream cheese in a piping bag and get ready, or my frosting into a piping bag to get ready to pipe it over. I'm going to turn this down now. Our grilled cheeses are almost done. Everything is almost done. We are on the final thing. Let me grab a cutting board here that we can place our muffins on, because you want to frost them not on your muffin container, come out. Now, I'll probably only frost one at a time because they do need to soften up or cool down before you get it, but when we get ready to frost it. But let's transfer these guys out on here. They'll cool off a little bit faster. You don't want to leave your in here too long, or they will get like stuck to this side. There we go. Because there is that good amount of sugar in there, plus the natural sugar from the bananas, pineapple, coconut. Kind of break. They're nice and hot, but I'm trying to get them off here. We'll just stick with, I'm going to get one more out, and we'll just do, that way later I can flip them over with that. So we'll just start off with our first half here. I'm going to let these cool over here. Okay. So we've got them. They're so pretty too. They're such a delicious, simple thing. Where's my bag? Aha. If you do not have a piping bag, don't worry, don't fret. Just use a Ziploc baggie that you have you just cut off the tip of it. We're going to get our last kind of finishing up on our grilled cheeses here. So we've got the first 2 flips, which again is to heat up that bread and start the beginning melting process on our grilled cheeses. So I'm going to just take my cream cheese frosting here, and we're just going to spoon it into our bag. Again, don't worry. You could also do it the old school fashion before things got bougie, where you just take a knife and you spread it over the top of them. I do love a nice piped on. I think it makes it look nicer. I do not use a piping tip. I just keep it simple, where I snip the bag of my piping bag. And I feel like a couple years ago, I bought a 200 pack of piping bags when I was really big into cake making and making all these like bougie cakes. And I'm still going strong with them. Okay. We've got ours. And then you're just going to kind of work it way. Once we cut the tip of the bottom, it will slide down there. But I always like to make sure you twist that seal on the top for this. And I think those are cool enough. Let me get scissors and we will cut the top of this. Where am I? And then we'll put, there's kind of the traditional way you do it. So just a small kind of tip at the top. You don't want to leave it too big. And then you're just going to slowly work it down. And then I'm just going to go over, and then you just kind of make a nice little base over it, just like this. And again, you see how pretty just having it come out of a piping bag makes it just a little bit nicer. So we've got those, and then you'll finish them off with a little bit of our crushed pecans. And that just gives it, you can also put some coconut on it. I prefer just the coconut inside it versus on it. So here is our beautiful hummingbird muffins with, full of bananas, pineapples, and all that jazz. Okay, our grilled cheeses are just about ready. I can see our cheese is nice and melty. So let's give our soup one last stir, and then we can serve up our lunch today. Beautiful. Okay, I'm going to turn this guy off, and let's get our plates and dishes out. And okay, I'm going to flip my cutting board over here so I can cut my grilled cheese in half. And we'll get ready to serve up. Beautiful. I'll turn this skillet off now. And let me grab my bread knife. Okay. For lunch today, we have our delicious grilled cheese made on our homemade sourdough bread. We use cheddar cheese, and it's a traditional loaf. And then we will be serving it up with our beef and vegetable stew that we made. We've used chuck roast, carrots, onions, celery. We have our tomatoes, potatoes in here, and kale. And it's got a rich kind of beefy tomato broth that will be perfect for dipping in our grilled cheese into. And then for our little dessert, we have a hummingbird cup muffin, which is made with crushed pineapple, bananas, cinnamon, coconut, pecans for just this lovely texture, like lovely rich, muffin, and cream cheese frosting over it. It's going to be fantastic. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on the page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to that link, search for what we made. So we've got our beef stewed grilled cheese and hummingbird muffins, and you can watch and cook along with me again. We're also going to probably make these as a recipe card for our members this week. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my Le Creuset pans, my Hexclad griddle, my knives, cutting boards, all the different gadgets I use in the kitchen I have in there for you guys to check out in case you're interested. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.